Your official contact for the best alternative talk on the planet. KGRARadio.com.
However you are and whenever you are, welcome good souls of the planet and beyond to Paranormal Now. I'm your host, Alan B. Smith. Join us as we traverse the cosmic highway of paranormal portals and tantalizing turnoffs. Tonight's guest is Ryan Sprague, author of Somewhere in the Skies, a human approach to an alien phenomena, and lead investigator and co-host of the new CW series Mysteries Decoded. And Ryan takes on an alien journey with a human story. I'm really excited to talk to Ryan tonight about his research. As usual, share your thoughts and experiences with us during or after the show on Facebook.com/ParanormalNowRadio, on Instagram at ParanormalNow, Twitter at Paranormal_Now. And usually, I would invite you to the KGRA chat room, or I'd remind you about the Paranormal Radio app sponsored phone lines to call in and speak with our guests. But tonight, I won't be doing that because this is a pre-recording. And Ryan and I have scheduled this. I've been looking forward to it for quite some time. We just couldn't get the Tuesday night thing to work. So that is where we are. So you are back in the future as you're listening to this. Ryan Sprague is a lead investigator and co-author of the CW television series Mysteries Decoded. He's the author of Somewhere in the Skies, a human approach to an alien phenomena. He is also the creator and host of the Somewhere in the Skies podcast on the E1 Podcast Network. His UFO journalism found him interviewing witnesses in all walks of life about UFO sightings and possible encounters with extraterrestrials. He's also interviewed military and intelligence officials directly on the topic, writing for such news sites as Open Minds Magazine, Rogue Planet, Omni Reboot, and Futurism. Speaking on the UFO topic, he has been featured on ABC News, Fox News, Science Channel, and is a regular on Travel Channel's series Mysteries at the Museum. He is currently working on his second book. If you want to find out more about Ryan, go to somewhereintheskies.com. Ryan, welcome to Paranormal Now.
Thank you so much for having me, man. I'm so happy we finally got to do this. And I'm also happy to have learned recently that we live within blocks of one another. Who would have thought? What a small world.
I know. We were bumping into each other right outside the subway entrance.
It's very New York.
It is very New York. But I still had a moment of pause. Really? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's Ryan Sprague.
I know, it was surreal. We both kind of looked at each other like, is this a hologram? Like, what's when you finally put the face to the voice you've been listening to for so long?
Right.
I've been listening to your show for a while too, and it's just it's surreal. It really is. So yeah. I'm super excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's funny that we're speaking digitally when we're probably just blocks away, but we're New Yorkers. We're so busy.
Oh yeah, we're so high maintenance.
We're so high maintenance. We can only talk digitally. Right? Exactly. So yeah, I'm really glad that we got you on the show because I think the first time it really started to resonate with me, the idea of what an experiencer was going through, was when I spoke with Ray Hernandez from Free. And he's a very passionate individual. And in our discussion, I was moved, and I'm thinking, okay, you know what? What is this other side of the story? Because like you say, we are told about the data analysis or the videos. We're told a sequence of events, but we often miss out on the feelings of the person who is experiencing a UFO sighting or a cryptid sighting, abduction perhaps, or whatever it may be. And my guess is that through the emotional experience, we can actually garner and learn something I'll use the word data. I don't know. This is your field of expertise, so I'll let you take that. But I'm thinking that there's something tangible we can take from that and learn about the UFO phenomena.
Absolutely. I mean, when I first got into the whole UFO topic, I'll be honest, man, I found it pretty dry and boring at first. There was time, date, size of a craft. That's good and fine. We need that thing. We need all of that data. But for me, I'd grown up, in the world of theater where I loved characters. And when I'm not doing the whole UFO thing, I'm a playwright here in New York. So characters were always my thing. I love to know how people tick, what motivates them, how do they change when something happens in their life. And as well as I do, within the structure of a play or a musical or even a movie, your character has to change somehow. And usually the play is the most pivotal moment in their lives. Otherwise, why are we here, dropped into their life at that moment? So for me, I really took what I had learned both in playwriting and the world of theater, and I tried to infuse that into a sort of unique approach to looking at the UFO phenomenon. What could I contribute that is new to the UFO conversation? And for me, that came in the form of characters, or let's say in this case, the people having a UFO experience or a paranormal experience. So yes, I think data is extremely important, but you look at the recent videos we've come across from the Navy pilots. Now, we didn't have the exact stories of the witnesses first. We got the videos, and those were compelling. They were intriguing, but we had no context for them. So when these pilots started coming forward and telling their own stories and what they thought it might be, how they felt during the event, that's when the real story starts to meld and morph together, and we get a fuller picture of what actually happened. So that's what it comes to for me, man. The people having the experiences.
Right. And I'm guessing that, do you work from an intuitive or emotional intelligence when you're approaching this topic?
Absolutely. I mean, my mentor, Peter Robbins, who I know you've spoken to in the recent past, he's also a theater nerd. We meet here in the city constantly and talk all about, his days of acting or directing. And I tell him what I'm doing now, both in the UFO world and the theater world. And we've always had that thing in common. I often tell people he is my mentor. Everything I've learned about interviewing people about UFO accounts comes from him. And the one thing he always told me was, when you're interviewing people, you have to be empathetic. Even if you don't believe them, or if, you have preconceived notions of what you're hearing or what you might hear, he always said you have to empathize, because it is not easy for people to come forward with these events. For some people it is, but for most it isn't. So I think it comes from a deep place of caring. I've always been a very sympathetic, empathetic person, and I think my family and friends can attest to that. I do take on a lot of emotional energy from those around me, and that can be good and bad sometimes. But when I'm interviewing these people, I am there. I'm in that moment with them, face to face, locking eyes, doing whatever I can to just be a listening ear, because sometimes that's all they need, someone to listen to them and not judge them or, laugh them off. So absolutely, I do believe it comes from a very deep emotional place, because I've been there. I've been in their shoes. I've been on a dock looking up over a body of water and saw my own UFO. So I don't have the luxury of disbelief when I hear these stories. So yeah.
Right, the luxury of disbelief. I like that description. I was watching a James Fox documentary recently. I forget which one, but it was fairly recent. And there were some young people in the documentary that, when he asked the question, what do you think when someone tells you that they saw a UFO? And some people still answer, they're crazy. And I thought, I know that the tides are changing, and that younger generations, there's a much larger swath of people who believe or are more open to this phenomena. But there are still people out there who just think you're crazy, and I think that's just utterly insensitive to make that assumption that just because someone saw something out of the ordinary, that they're not right in the head, or that, they must have misunderstood. And like you said, those people need allies. They need to know there's people like you out there who care enough to hear their story and try to understand it.
That's a good point. Understanding is something we may never truly get to when it comes to the UFO phenomenon, but at least understanding one another and realizing they didn't make this up. Yes, there's hoaxes out there. There's people who are fantasy prone, but as well as I do, most of these people reporting UFOs or claimed abduction experiences or even paranormal experiences, they're everyday people, doctors, law enforcement, professors, psychologists, waiters, your barista at your coffee shop. I guarantee you has had a UFO sighting at one point or another, but people are still afraid to talk about it. And you bring up another good point, the whole crazy aspect. Now, I do see that changing. That ridicule factor seems to be slowly shedding, but I don't know, man. I don't know if it's ever going to truly go away, because it doesn't even come from a place of making fun of people or ridiculing them. I think it really comes from a place of fear. People aren't willing to accept that their reality isn't what they thought it once was. And that's kind of what happens to these people who have those experiences. Right. They're conditioned to think one way their whole lives, and then in the blink of an eye, that changes, and something smacks them in the face and says, hey, look, new reality right here for you. So,
well, do you think we're still living in the Robertson panel paradigm?
No, that is a really good comparison in terms of the way the government or officialdom handles the UFO topic. We know for a fact at the close of Blue Book, the Robertson panel, that they were forcing media to ridicule the topic and to downplay it. And I don't really see that any longer. Ever since that New York Times article came out, it really did change things. And we do have to thank I can't believe I'm saying this. We do have to thank Tom DeLonge and To the Stars Academy for that. No matter what you think of him as a person or even his music, he has changed the entire UFO discourse, both in the mainstream media and I would say in the alternative media. Things like what you and I do here on KGRA or in podcast form or book form. The conversation is changing, and the way that media is handling this. I mean, we're coming out with new serious articles on UFOs almost on a weekly to monthly basis now. Washington Post, New York Post, New York Times. It's insane. I never thought I would be living in this age where that happened.
It's not just the Sun anymore.
Exactly. It's no longer the thing of tabloids. And I'm really looking forward to see where that goes, where the conversation goes. And it's a really interesting, cool, fun, exciting, terrifying time to live in, I'd say.
Well, tell us about your UFO sighting. What was that like, and what did you see?
Yeah, so this happened back in 1995. I was 12 years old at that time. So anyone doing the math, I just had a birthday. I won't give away my age, but this is 95. I was on a weekend getaway with my parents. We were up at the St. Lawrence River, which I actually just returned to the actual spot where I had this UFO sighting only days ago. So it was kind of a full circle thing for me. I never thought I would find the location again, but I did. But getting back to that, I was fishing off a dock, which was outside of a motel that we were staying at. This is right on the border of Canada and the U.S. The St. Lawrence River literally cut between the two countries. And it was getting dark, so I started to, reel my line in and go in for the night. And I'm listening to Green Day I had a Discman at the time, and I remember specifically listening to the song Basket Case when this is going on. And I'm reeling my line in, and as I'm looking at the water, I see 3 white lights in the water. So I kind of bend down towards the water, and I look into it. I thought maybe something was down there, and then, I realized, oh, duh, Ryan, it's above you. It was a reflection. So I look up, and it was just hanging there, whatever it was, formation of lights, no structured craft, just 3 white lights, red light in the middle, and it was just floating above me. I don't know how high up it was, how big it was, nothing like that. I didn't really have my analytical glasses on at the time because I was terrified, man. I didn't know what I was seeing.
Yeah.
Ripped my headphones off, tried to hear something, nothing. It was completely silent. I could just hear the water hitting the dock, and I tried screaming for my dad. He was inside watching a Yankees game, and I couldn't get anything out. It was like I went mute for that time. I don't know if it was like shock, fear. I don't know. But eventually the thing started to float towards Canada, and I finally got a little squeal out, and my dad does come out, and he saw the tail end of the thing as it was going towards Canada. So at least I had another witness to tell me I wasn't like seeing things, but
Right.
He did tell me, do his fatherly duty. It's a plane. And that's kind of what I went with for years after that. But I think deep down I knew whatever the hell it was definitely not like a plane. Even at 12, I knew what I was looking at was not a conventional aircraft. So that's how it all started for me, man. I was terrified. I had nightmares about it. I started taking up books on UFOs, and it was just a rabbit hole from there, I can tell you.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, what about audio? Did you hear any sounds at all, or?
The only thing I can really attest to is not like a sound, but I did feel like almost like a hum, like a vibration kind of traveling through my body as I was looking up at the thing. So I don't think it was real. I don't know if it was coming from it or whatever it was, the formation of lights. I don't know if it was some sort of
like an electrical charge, or
yeah, or maybe it was just adrenaline and fear. Like I can't really describe it. The only way I've ever really been able to compare it to something is if you're at like a concert and you feel that bass really close to a speaker, and it's just like rattling your bones and your organs inside. That's kind of how it felt. But there was no noise. There was no bass level noise happening that my ears could perceive. So I don't know. I honestly don't know what that was. And it wasn't really what I saw or what I heard. It was honestly what I felt that night that stuck with me most.
When I had my sighting at 12 years old as well. And
Really?
Yeah, fortunately for me, I had a friend there to witness it. Afterwards, one of the first thoughts that came to my mind was I told myself, around that age of 12, you're on the cusp of leaving childhood, right? So you have the wherewithal and the mindfulness to distinguish between childness and adultness, right? And the first thought I thought was, I can't forget this as an adult. I can't look back on this and tell myself it wasn't real. I was so afraid that I was going to become one of those adults who doubted kids. And I was afraid that I was going to not believe my own experience. So it firmly implanted the memory of that in my mind. And months, years go by. Like I always thought about this, always talked about it, and reminded myself, don't ever tell yourself that this is not real. This actually happened. Did you have a similar sentiment?
That is a really interesting way of looking at it. I would say I was actually the opposite. I fought against it. I denied it for a really, really long time. I mean, I didn't really start talking about this UFO event until I think I told maybe a couple people in college, maybe when I was a little drunk or something.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
But the only other people that knew about it were my parents, especially my dad, who saw the tail end of it. And they sort of saw where I was going and kind of navigated my journey as I got older. I started watching so many science fiction movies and Communion, Travis Walton, Close Encounters, all this stuff. And I could tell they were a little worried for me about like where I was heading with all this and how obsessed I was becoming. And they didn't really know why, but I think deep down it was because I was afraid to talk about my own experience, and I wanted to try to unravel it or compare it to all these other things I was seeing. X-Files, mid-90s came out. I became obsessed with it.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it was a pop culture phenomenon when it happened. So everyone was watching it, not just people interested in UFOs.
Yeah.
So that was a big turning point for me when the X-Files came around, to be completely honest.
Yeah.
It was cool to like UFOs. But I think for me, kind of life took over, and I did shun away from my experience for a really long time until I got hooked up with the people over at Open Minds, the people who had the magazine and the website and took the topic of UFOs very seriously. And I started writing for them about UFOs and people having encounters. And that's when I started to open up a little bit more and a little bit more. And then when I decided to write a book about it, I knew I could no longer hide behind this facade, you know, that like, oh, I'm just looking from this topic from an outside perspective. No, for so long, I was a part of the story that I was eventually going to try to tell. That was my first time.
You didn't want to be the freak.
Exactly. I didn't want to be the freak.
Right.
But if I'm going to interview hundreds of people about having these experiences, if they're considered freaks, then I'm going to be a freak. Right. And I want to be there with them. So that's when I decided to finally tell my story, was at the beginning of my book. And some people think it was a good idea. Some people think it was a bad idea to do that. Like it kind of paints me as a biased interpreter of these stories or what I think they might have been or not been. But at the end of the day, I made that decision to come forward, just like the courage these people had in my book to do so too. So yeah, that was it for me.
It's funny how everything is relative. What we used to consider a freak show 50 plus years ago was somebody with a lot of tattoos, a bearded lady, you know, and that now your everyday person can fit into so many of those categories that used to be considered freak show. You know, I mean, you're kind of hard pressed to find someone who doesn't have a tattoo these days.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, and so I hope that change also translates into the experience or community and with the work that you're doing. We're coming up to a break shortly, but I do want to ask you, because you mentioned Tom DeLonge. I had Alejandro Rojas on a couple of weeks ago, and you know, he thinks, you know, that the whole ATIP thing and To the Stars Academy is a legit deal. For me, behind a microphone, I don't have a relationship with any of these people, so it's easier for me to be a little bit more objective, I think. Not that anyone else can't be, but at least for me, I know it's easy because I don't have a relationship. And so I look at Tom DeLonge and I have a very similar sentiment as you. You know, he is a marketer. He is really good at marketing. And so is Luis Elizondo. And that's something that the community was missing. And I'm very grateful that they are out and about and doing their thing, because the last 2 years have been extraordinarily exciting. And I wouldn't trade it, would you?
No, not for one iota of time. I think it's amazing. It's not what any of us ever expected, that a former, you know, frontman of our Blink-182 would be would be the face of ufology. Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of the criticism really stems from, Alan, is this guy comes out of nowhere and he starts this multimedia company, and now moving into like aerospace and and everything we can possibly think of, Tom DeLonge is trying to do. He's an extremely ambitious individual, and he's always been that way. And a lot of people also don't realize that he is not new to the UFO game. I mean, when you hear this guy talk about UFOs, he knows everything. He's read every book, and I can hear it in his voice. Even early on, before To the Stars Academy or any of this happened, you could hear in his voice how passionate he was about the topic. And we now know that all throughout his years with Blink-182, every free minute he had was reading UFO books, watching the documentaries. So he is one of us. I think where the criticism really lies is, does he want us to be a part of what he's doing? It does seem to some people that everything Tom DeLonge is doing comes from the shoulders of the giants before him, Stanton Friedman and Jacques Vallée, and all these really heavy hitters in what we consider the UFO field. But he doesn't really want to talk to any of them, the UFO people, as they are considered. So I think that's what's really interesting is Tom DeLonge is trying to do this, and a lot of people are for it, a lot of people are against it. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, it's just one guy and one opinion. So I think that's what people really have to keep in mind is this is just one avenue, one approach to the Stars Academy, but we can all keep doing our work and hopefully share our information. So
right. I mean, there's certainly alternative approach versus arrogance. I don't get the sense that there's an arrogance thing here. I think he's trying to do something different, and other people, it doesn't rub them the right way, and they are sort of resentful for that. But it's working. It's working. So fingers crossed that more will come of this over the next couple of years. I hope that they have more up their sleeves. My conspiracy theory, and I don't often propose them, but my grand conspiracy theory is that Blink 182.
Put your tinfoil hat on.
Blink 182 is going to show up at the Raid Area 51, Storm Area 51 event, and they're going to play. That's my conspiracy. I'm just putting it out there. This is Alan B. Smith.
I love it.
This is Alan B. Smith with Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio. We are speaking with Ryan Sprague, author of Somewhere in the Skies, and we'll be talking about more of what is happening in the skies and the aftermath of that. We'll get right down to the alien-human connection when we come back on the other side. Stay tuned. And you're listening to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith on KGRA Radio. This is a pre-recording tonight with our guest Ryan Sprague. Taking us out of the break is January Waits by Septembrio. For those of you who've been following this show, I'm quite sure you're familiar with Septembrio at this point. And the backup vocals for that is Lizette Xavier, another talented artist. You can find out more about them online and go to septembrio with a y.com. Okay, so bringing it back round to that human place, because no matter what experience we have, no matter what comes from the outside and affects us, it's always our human experience. And one of the most beautiful things to experience as a human is the emotional side of our existence. And I'd like to find out from Ryan, are people coming out of these experiencer situations, abductions, close encounters, sightings, for the better emotionally? Or are there some more negative, detrimental effects that are going on here? Ryan, what do you think?
That's a really good question. I mean, after interviewing, I'd say close to about maybe 200 or so people for the book, Alan. I had to narrow it down to maybe, let's say, a dozen or so to really, make it book length, to be honest. I wish I could have included every story. The ones that made it into the book for me are the ones that had the most emotional impact on the individuals who had the experience, and also on me. When I heard the stories, they hit me in ways I wasn't really ready for, or prepared for, or was even expecting. So it really runs a spectrum. Humans are complicated. Let's be honest. There's no black and white. There's no, I had this experience and everything's good, everything's fine, or everything's terrible and my life is over.
Sure.
And that's frustrating because we like those extremes. We live in a world now of extremes. So that's kind of what people are expecting. And maybe that's what I expected when I first started to write the book. Maybe I'll find all these people became very enlightened and it changed their entire perception of reality or the world they live in. Or maybe it was terrifying and they become, self-shunned from society or whatnot. So for me, it really did run a very broad spectrum from person to person. There's so many variables involved, but there are some people who I can say flat out, it did change their lives for the better. I spoke to one individual who had a abduction experience, as he claims, multiple abduction experiences, where when he was aboard this craft and he was interacting telepathically with these beings on the craft, very sort of prototypical, grays, big black eyes, that sort of prototypical abduction experience. Something that really stuck out, though, was they showed him a symbol of prayer hands, two human hands clasped together with a lightning bolt through it. And he thought that was really interesting. He'd never been a religious person, nothing like that, but he took that, he interpreted that, I should say, as he should start to look at religion, what it is, what it could be. And after multiple abduction experiences, he started to go to what would you even call it? Like training to be a priest, going into the priesthood. And he eventually became a minister, I believe, of a Universal Unitarian Church. So right there, man, you have a guy who had an abduction experience, took a message from these possible alien intelligences, and it completely changed his entire life. He's now a person of faith and believes that whatever he experienced, it might have been alien, it might have been miraculous, and mixed them together. So that was a fascinating one for me. But then you have people on the flip side who have such traumatic, sort of dark experiences where they never want to talk about it again, and they sort of suppress it and become alcoholics or become depressed. There are many people I came across like that as well. And it's sad, man, because again, being that empathetic person that I am and a lot of other investigators are, you don't like seeing that because it's just, not only are they being ridiculed by society because of what they came forward with, but it's so bad and so traumatic that they can't even accept it into their lives anymore in any way, shape, or form. So there are some times where I was really shaken by the stories I heard, the people I met. Some broke down crying when they were recalling these experiences. Yeah. Others were laughing and having a grand old time. And it's just been a very rewarding journey, a very big learning experience. And that continues up until today. I mean, I wrote the book. That's good and fine. But I can't pretend to have any solid answers on what's going on out there. I just continue to tell the stories of those having the experiences and give them a platform to have their voice heard for once.
Right. It sounds like post-traumatic stress disorder to a degree, right?
Absolutely.
Because these are long-term effects that occur. And it sounds like these are people who are unable to process the experience itself.
Totally. And I mean, a lot of people, skeptics, like to use the whole idea that a lot of these people who have go into hypnotic regression, let's say, and have these alien abduction experiences, they always like to attribute it to childhood trauma. Maybe they were abused somehow as kids, and this is kind of what they used to mask that. I can say that might be the case for some of them. It probably is. But for a lot of these people, you look at people like John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist, who interviewed so many people who claimed alien abductions and came out on the other side saying these people were not abused. The trauma that they experienced is real to them, and I can't explain that, but I also can't deny the plethora of stories I'm hearing about people claiming these experiences with possible alien intelligences. So that's kind of it for me, man. When skeptics always go to the abuse thing as kids, I say you were not there, and that's kind of what I go into with any person I interview is I was not there when this event happened to you, so I cannot say or judge what happened. It's just like anything else in life, you know? Someone recalls a car crash they saw, or let's say someone getting shot or something like that. You weren't there when it happened. So you can't judge that person for how they reacted to it, or let's say they cowered into a corner. Look at this recent event we had right here in Manhattan, this mass panic in Times Square when a motorcycle backfired. I was working at a theater at that moment when it happened. I heard the loud bangs outside. 1,200 people in my theater started panicking. There was people, banging on the doors, screaming, let us in, let us in. And then our people in our theater are running all over the place, looking for places to hide. And I didn't know what to do, man. I ran into the women's room with a lot of other people. People went into stalls, locked themselves in. People went into boiler rooms and locked themselves in there. I found myself in the dressing room of several Broadway actors. It was just, you can't know what's going to happen with these sort of experiences. So if someone's having a weird paranormal experience or a UFO event, you can liken it to a traumatic event happening before their very eyes, and they don't know what to do or who to turn to. So yeah, it's fascinating.
It is, but the thing, okay, so that's the thing, is when you, Ryan, had that experience and what others have, these sort of dramatic or traumatic experiences, they are burnt into your memory. You don't forget those.
No.
And that's the thing is, when someone says I had this weird experience, I remember it clear as day because it was traumatic. Then the doctor says, well, then that's transference. It's like, no, you don't tell me or Ryan that what you experienced wasn't real. Heidi Hollis, I love, she has this thing. She says, well, the government gives me a license and says my eyes are good enough to drive. But I tell them I see a weird thing, and suddenly my eyes are wrong.
My vision's terrible.
My vision's tainted, right?
That's a really good analogy.
Right. And I feel terrible that you had to experience that, because as many people now, unfortunately throughout the country, but as New Yorkers have known and experienced for quite some time, there's a certain amount of living on the edge here. I'm sure you remember a couple of years ago, the car that ran into Times Square. Yep. And I remember for me, my similar experience to what you had was, it was about a year and a half after 9/11. And I was downtown in the Village, West 4th Street area on the waiting for the A train. And I heard this boom, just this boom deep, and everybody paused.
Yeah.
And I remember I was reading the book. It was Mark Twain's short stories collection. See, that's how vivid trauma creates memories, right? You remember these little things that you were doing.
I remembered Green Day on my disc.
Exactly.
It's funny the things you remember when these things happen.
Right, which tells me that these are some of the most reliable memory experiences that a person can have. Not the least reliable, which is what the skeptical community would say. And so I hear this boom, and everyone's pausing and looking around. Then all of a sudden, I remember two guys were running up the stairs, I think from the D level, and then they ran back down. Like they ran up to the top of the stairs, paused, and I'm looking at them, and then they ran back down. And then now everyone's like looking around. We're all on edge, like, what is happening? And then those two guys, like 3 seconds later, come running up and they're screaming bomb.
Oh my God.
And so literally it was like less than a flash of a second. We all ran at the same exact time. You know, just human instinct kicked in and we just booked. And we're on the end of the A train where there's a long ramp to get off on the exit there in West 4th.
Yep. I'm familiar.
Yeah. And so fortunately it was a long ramp because I think that prevented people from, you know, bumping and hitting each other too much. But there was definitely some herd mentality there. And
trampling, I would assume.
Almost. There was some bumping. It could have gotten bad. Thankfully it didn't. Okay. But I'm looking around me and I can see people bumping into each other. And I was waiting for it to get bad. And fortunately it didn't. You know, and then it turned out that, in fact, there was some guy who threw some kind of like a pipe bomb, or I think they call it a fire bomb. He put like something like a wood and some other like basic explosive, like a small gas tank. And when the train hit it, it exploded. Needless to say, 11 people ended up with smoke inhalation issues, went to the hospital, but fortunately, no one was severely hurt. But that's what life is like often in New York. You're kind of on the edge like that. So when
can I mention one thing?
Oh, sure, yeah. Mm-hmm.
You make a good point of living on the edge here in New York, and we all brag about that. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, New York's so, you know, edge of your seat and gritty, but we react just like any other humans when these things happen. And the only reason I wanted to interrupt you there, the guy who eventually became the priest, he told me he's an African American man. He grew up in Harlem his whole life, and he had to learn to be tough. You know, that's what you do when you live in Harlem back in the 70s and 80s. And big tough guy. And when he first saw that alien creature in his bedroom that he told me about, he said the first thing I did is I put the sheet over my head, I cowered into my bed, and I started crying because I was so scared. So. Yeah, sorry. I just had to implement that in there.
Yeah. We might have that thick, gritty skin, but underneath all that, you know? But and then there's those of us that are transplants that consider ourselves New Yorkers, you know, but we were not born and raised here. But yeah, so when someone comes to you and tells you their story, does a genuine account become obvious to you through the way someone tells a story? Sometimes do you struggle to decide if this is authentic or not, or just sometimes you go, this person, this really happened to them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a constant struggle with that. You know, along with being empathetic comes trust, and I'm a very trusting person, and there are people out there who will take advantage of that, no matter where you come from, no matter what kind of person you are. There are people out there who will just take advantage of that. We have many of them in the UFO field, these almost cult-like mentalities of spinning these stories that just simply cannot be true, logically be true. But then again, who am I to say?
Like holes in the story type of thing, or?
Absolutely. Or, you know, claiming that they worked on a military base on Mars with Obama, and they're fighting an intergalactic race of aliens in the future. Again, like, I shouldn't judge because I just preached that's not what you should do. But it's people like that who tell these stories that cannot back it up in any way, shape, or form, who will take advantage of people's belief systems. So it's hard. It's hard when you have these charlatans or these fantasy-prone speakers out there saying these things, because you don't know if it's inspiring other people to then do the same. So there are times when I've interviewed people who have told me a story, claimed that's their own story, yet I've heard it 10 times before from other individuals. So That's hard. And that's not about finding a pattern. That's literally word for word, beat for beat. They're kidnapping, I should say, a story from somebody else, hijacking it, as it were. So those are the times where I'm just like, this is very unfortunate, because for every genuine individual having an experience, there's someone behind them looking to write a book or get a movie deal or this or that. And I just want to tell them it's not worth lying or making this thing up. You're not going to make money. There's not a lot of money in the UFO field, guys. Let me just be honest. Even as a researcher or a speaker or an author, we're not rolling in dough over here when it comes to this topic. That's just simply not the way it is. Yep. It comes from a true passion to find answers, in my opinion. So I probably spent more money investigating and researching UFOs than I will ever make actually doing it. So yeah, it's hard, man. It's a struggle from person to person, but I genuinely believe everyone that I had in my book, hundreds of others that weren't in the book, and all those people still having these experiences.
Yeah. Trust is an interesting thing. Yes, you have to check someone's motivation, right? That's part of investigating, because someone's motive can give them away if they're being, if they're not being genuine, and if they're a charlatan. But at the same time, people who do have actual experiences, like you said, could use that to try to cash in on it and make money off of that real experience. So it muddies the water, because you're trying to differentiate between who's looking for just to make money or, 15 minutes of fame, and who is telling the truth for the sake of the truth.
Yeah, and who's to say it's not both?
Right,
it's a very hypocritical field, and I know I'm hypocritical at times with the way I present information or give my opinions on things. I probably contradict myself constantly, and that's kind of what this phenomenon represents. Every time you think you know something, it proves you wrong time and time again. But in terms of it being both, you look at someone like, let's say, Whitley Strieber with Communion. Now, that first book came out, and I genuinely, firmly believe that he had a legitimate experience when that happened. There are those out there, I'm not claiming to be one of them, but there are those out there that say everything that happened after that sounds too sensational. He got caught up in this storm of acknowledgement and publicity that, how do you stay relevant? You start to make things up. And we know that there are probably other people out there who've had a genuine experience, whether it's just lights in the sky or claimed abductions or, stories of a miracle or a paranormal experience, that then they feel this pressure to want to build upon that. And that's hard. We're creatures of habit. We're creatures of ego. So when someone is no longer listening to us, how do we get them back? Well, let's elaborate a little, let's exaggerate a little, or let's just straight up make something up. Yeah. So that's when it really comes down to the testament of the person who had the experience. If they really just want to tell that story, good, that's it.
Of all the people that you interviewed, how many of them were able to present some form of, photographic evidence or something physical, trace left behind?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I'm going to say maybe about 30%. Now, that's, again, the hypocritical side of me saying, like, we need proof, we need evidence. I can't pretend that all the people in my book have solid evidence that would be admissible to be like, yep, you had a genuine paranormal or alien experience. For me, it came down to the person and the people around them, and the story they had to tell me, and the fact that they were willing to use their real names was another big thing for me. Once you come forward and use your real name with these things, that is it. There is no turning back. People can Google you. They can find out where you work. They can anything. The age we live in, you could find out anything about someone with the click of a keystroke. So they have to be willing to risk their reputation to come forward with these things. If they're making it up and they think that's worth losing their job over, or friends, or a job, stuff like that, their reputation over, then that's their loss.
Yeah, it's funny how you were saying when you were younger, you kept this close to your chest, this experience. And I suppose you were saying you were reading books. Were you sharing your interest, or were you hiding both the interest and your firsthand account?
Not my interest so much. I mean, I remember going to my parents whenever they have doctor's appointments, and we'd have to wait in the waiting room for an hour for them to get seen. I'd always have one of those those, what were those big black books about UFOs and ghosts? You know the ones I'm talking about?
I found funny story. I found a collection of those in our neighborhood not too long ago.
Oh, really?
Somebody was moving out, and there was just a bunch of them, and I snagged them. And I can't remember the name right now. But yes, I know what you're talking about.
I wonder if it was me, because I remember putting books out outside of my apartment when I moved out of Queens. It could have been me, man.
I don't know.
You might actually own my books.
Well, not to be morbid, but this person had, I believe, passed away. So
I might be a ghost. No, I don't want to make light of that. That's very tragic and unfortunate. But at least it went to someone who actually would appreciate them, such as yourself. So that's good to hear.
Right.
But yeah, no, I would write. I literally, Alan, I would write essays to myself about Roswell or Rendlesham. I would write these things out and just read them back to myself. And I wasn't sharing it with anybody. So what that purpose was, I can't tell you. I think as the years went on, like I said, the X-Files exploded. And I'd get friends at sleepovers to watch an episode of the X-Files. I'd slowly give them little breadcrumbs and be like, that case in the X-Files is actually inspired by this, which apparently actually happened. So I could see that researcher or lecturer in me starting to come out at an early age. I just wasn't ready to fully embrace it,
Sure.
Sports took over, girls took over, school took over. It's just how life is. So.
Yeah, it's funny. I was the opposite. I was so open about all of those things I was interested in.
So envious.
But I was also a little naive too. I remember some person had convinced me there was a shop called the Diamond Mine, I think it was called. They sold jewelry, and they convinced me that it was secretly run by aliens in our small town. It's like, now I realize that was not real. But I was impressionable because I was so open to anything related to paranormal, and I love talking about those topics. And I remember when nobody uses this word anymore, I don't think, the net, was nice. Was new, and
it's very 90s.
It is, and Sandra Bullock, and I would print out these postings on those old 90s websites about all these different types of alien species, and I had like a file cabinet of just stuff that I would print out and print out and print out.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and I'm sure some of that is somewhere in an attic somewhere. But all right, well, let's take a break there, and we're going to come back on the other side, and we'll talk about more of these firsthand accounts that Ryan has studied. And this is a pre-recording, but if you do have any comments or questions during or about this show, please message me. And Ryan, if people want to reach out to you, how do they do that?
Oh, absolutely. I would love that. They can reach out to me on Facebook. Just search for Ryan Sprague. I got a Facebook group, Somewhere in the Skies Podcast. They can always reach out to me there, or just go to my website, somewhereintheskies.com.
Okay, so this is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio. Hang in there. We will be right back with so much more. And welcome back to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith for KGRA Radio. My guest is Ryan Sprague, and yeah, we'll be talking about Stranger Things. You're listening to Friends Don't Lie from Septembrio. Thank you again, Michael 8, for providing our music for us as usual. Okay, so part 2, I will say, of this show will be an examination of the way to look forward after an event. So Ryan, if somebody has an experience, and it, unlike the first person we discussed, is a positive one. Actually, no, well, you also mentioned the preacher as well. What is the message going forward? What are they taking from it and giving to the greater humanity, or is it just for them?
I honestly feel, man, I mean, let's look at the age of the contactees, back 60s, 70s. You had all these people claiming that they spoke to Venusians or starseeds from the Pleiades system, and they brought messages of peace and love, and you're destroying your planet, you got to stop. No, I'm not saying that, they were all full of crap, all these contactees and everything. Again, it might be a case of legitimate experiences mixed with some sort of narrative that they now want to spin it into. You move forward with more recent events, which I discuss in the book, anything from like the 80s and on, where it's not so much a grand message that is being given to these people having these experiences. I think it is a deeply, deeply personal experience for each and every individual. Yeah, I don't think one race of aliens is taking, doing a little fishing experiment, getting what they can, and then saying, you should do this. Don't use fossil fuels anymore, and then drop them back into their normal lives. I think it is a deeply personal examination of that individual, how they react to the experience afterwards, how they might react during it, and how they come out on the other side of it. So again, there's many people I interviewed who maybe had something unlocked in their brain, and they were now open to other possibilities. One guy I remember became an artist after he had a very close encounter UFO experience. He'd never drawn a thing in his life, and now he's seeing all these amazing geometric patterns in his mind, and he's relaying them in artistic interpretation, and it's beautiful. He showed me some of these paintings, and I'm just like, are you sure? Are you sure you never went to like Pratt or some really nice art school? Because these are amazing. And he said, no, talk to my wife. Talk to my dad. I don't have an artistic bone in my body. So you do have to wonder when it comes to things like that. Or you have guys or women who had an experience and they never want to talk about it again. And they took nothing from it. Cool. I saw something, moving on with my life. I got bills to pay. I got a family to feed. So it really does depend. So is there some overall message that these intelligences are trying to convey? I can't tell you. I honestly can't. I think whatever the individual takes from that experience, that's going to be the answer or the message for them.
Mm-hmm. Have you noticed, or has anyone reported to you any symbols or images that they have seen that are maybe similar at all? And I ask because it seems to me just a very common symbol for any human to draw and come up with based on geometry and mathematics is a circle with a triangle in it. Mm. But I feel like that pops up on occasion. And I don't think I've shared this before, but I've personally had, I had a dream once, and a dream / kind of vision thing, right? Mm-hmm. And there was an alien presence of some sort there, and this symbol of a circle with a triangle in it Blue and yellow colors were the predominant colors that I saw. And then not too long after that, I went to an art gallery called Cosm here in New York. Are you familiar with Alex
so.
Gray? He's a psychedelic artist. And I saw that symbol in his work. And I thought, this is really strange. And I remember the Rendlesham Forest, the symbol. I think there was a symbol, right, related to that.
Yeah, James Penniston reported that.
Yeah.
Scribbled it in his notebook. Wow.
And so I don't know. I'm just asking you, have you come across anything like that?
In terms of the people I've interviewed, I do remember, I can't really recall anything specific, to be honest, but I do remember several people claiming to have seen symbols of circles or the infinity symbol. That was one I came across a few times, actually, where people claim to have seen, like, kind of like Septembrio's logo, that infinity symbol in 8 turned the other way. I love his music, by the way. I gotta add props for putting that in there.
Thanks.
But back to the conversation. The people who claim to have seen these infinity symbols found it really fascinating. What are they trying to say with this? Is it everything is eternal? This is just going to keep going on and on and on. I don't know. That's fascinating, though, that you saw that symbol in a possible lucid dream of some sort, and then came across it in someone's art. I don't know, man. Ooh, I got chills when you told me that.
Yeah, it was a weird time period where, we're in synchronicities just kind of happen, and you feel like you're just tapped into something. And there is, I think, and I'm sure you're familiar with Graham Hancock and obviously Jacques Vallée and Terence McKenna. There is definitely a parallel or parallels between psychedelic experiences and UFO or paranormal experiences. Have you had any mind-altering experiences that you would categorize as something paranormal?
Oh man, I don't want to get in trouble with the law here.
Okay, gotcha. Well, you can stick to mind altering as a general term if you wish.
I'm just messing with you. I can fully say, unlike some of our former presidents, that I did inhale. Right. No, I wouldn't say that I ever had a personal psychedelic experience, but I know many individuals who have, under very careful, responsible strictures or conditions. And again, it's such a personal, subjective experience that I don't know. I can't say, did they tap into something or did they go to some other realm? I remember, speaking of synchronicities, I spent a weekend with Mike Cleland, the owl guy, as many people know him, up in his cabin in upstate New York. I love that guy. He has so many stories about people claiming UFO experiences and abductions in relation to owls. If anyone isn't familiar, they should definitely check out his work. But I wanted to spend a weekend with him and a couple experiencers. So I went up there, and they actually invited a shaman, which was interesting. I'd never met a shaman before. And this particular shaman, it was not what I expected at all. He shows up, and he's like this gruff motorcycle dude, tattoos all over him. And it was interesting. I remember asking him about that. Like, how do they go to this other realm? How do they do this? And he said there's many different ways. And for him, he has used things such as ayahuasca in the past to do those sorts of things. And he told me flat out, yes. I mean, you leave the body, you go to another realm, your consciousness separates and is able to do things you never thought possible. So I believed him, and I've had other people tell me the same thing. You look at the work of Micah Hanks, who wrote an amazing book about, I think it was called something like The Mystic in the Molecule, where he interviewed many people who, under mind-altering drugs or even meditating are able to communicate with other intelligences or possibly even with the dead. It's fascinating to me. I came across several cases of that, but it's hard, man. It's hard because unless you're willing to do it yourself to experience that, I'm terrified of drugs. I will say that first and foremost. I'm afraid of how I will personally react to it, and it's not an experiment I personally want to do, even if it does mean I can talk to an alien. I'd rather stay on the other side and keep my feet on the ground with that one.
Well, it reminds me, when you said owl, of the Hopkinsville event, and there definitely is some kind of connection there between shape-shifting, if you will, goblins, owls, and aliens. Do you think that there is an interconnection?
Yeah, I mean, the name of your show sort of says it all for me. I do believe there is some intrinsically linked connection between the paranormal, the supernatural, UFOs. I had this debate with Micah Hanks recently, who is a very, by the books kind of skeptical person when it comes to, let's say, Bigfoot, cryptids. Bigfoot is a flesh and blood creature. That is it. Muddying the waters and saying it's a ghost or it's paranormal or supernatural, it only makes it more difficult for us to narrow in on an answer. And I completely understand where he's coming from with that. But on the flip side of it, when we've never found a body, when we've never found trace evidence, some claim they have when it comes to, let's say, Bigfoot or Mothman or lake creatures, you do have to wonder, where are these things? Why are we not finding a body? So for me, I think they are all linked. I really do. And I think that's kind of where my research is heading in terms of no longer being the UFO guy or being, we have these camps where they never really cross over. You don't hear a lot of ghost hunters on a UFO podcast or in a UFO book or documentary. So I find that changing. You look at the work of Greg and Dana Newkirk and their whole Hellier thing that they did with the Hopkinsville
it's
case.
fantastic, yeah.
They're using tarot cards and trying to, trying to summon
spirit boxes and
it's crazy. But that's the kind of stuff that really makes me think, okay, if we can't communicate with an alien, and we haven't for so many years with the limited knowledge we have in terms of SETI or things like that.
Traditional methods, exactly. Why not? Why not try to use a spirit box or channeling? I'm all for any way that we can look at these things from any different approach. So for me, it really comes down to let's work together. Let's not brush aside the paranormal people and say, no, we're looking at aliens and that's the only explanation for UFOs. Why? Why can't a ghostly Bigfoot come off of a UFO and say hi to us? We're in no place to say that they're not connected, in my personal opinion. Right. I always kind of imagine that Sasquatch is, they're here on vacation. They hop off the ship for a little while, hang out in the woods because that's what their home planet is like, and they do their thing, hang out. Maybe they camp out, right? The so-called Bigfoot nests, and then they hop on their ship and go off to whence they came. And some people will say, well, the same thing is they're interdimensional, right? And they come from another dimension, they visit us here, and then they go back. See, it's funny because when I first came up with the name of the show, Paranormal Now, after a little while, I started getting concerned about the name of the show because I think people were identifying it as one thing. Right. And for me, the UFO enigma has always been paranormal. I always, in my mind, put those in the same category. UFOs, ufology, paranormal, to me it was all the same thing because what is the reports that we get of these UFO events are supernatural. They defy science as we knew it and sometimes know it still. And so for me, I thought, who knows? We don't know what these things are. I always, of course, subscribed that they were, more nuts and bolts type of thing. But, just as a general phraseology, paranormal just encompassed all of those things that we don't really understand, but perhaps one day we will.
Yes, yeah. A lot of people always say the paranormal is just science we haven't discovered yet or can understand. And I do agree with you. And who's to say, like, one UFO event is alien and another is supernatural or us from the future? Like, there doesn't have to be one explanation for any of these things. Yeah. And that's frustrating in one way, because we are human and we want an answer to things. We are sometimes that focused or simple-minded, but at the same time, when you have individuals who are willing to challenge that and say, I don't think it is what we once thought it was, that's when I really respect those individuals who put their necks out to say those things. I spoke to a guy, Michael Masters, recently, who wrote an entire book all about, I believe, what did he call it? Temporal terrestrials, I think he called it, in terms of aliens are us from the future. And that's fascinating. That's always been something I've ascribed to. I think a lot of the way that these aliens look, in terms of like our evolution or de-evolution, as some people look at it, is us. That's why some of these aliens have very human-like features: 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth. But maybe they're a lot simpler in the future. We sort of are stripped of our individuality as we move closer to sort of a more robotic-like nature, this singularity we hear so much about. Maybe that is the way it is, and they're coming back to see, oh God, how can we become what we once were again? It's fascinating. I could go down a whole different rabbit hole with that.
Well, one day I think, oh, that is a very exciting and fascinating topic, point of view, and other days I think I hate this idea, because I love the movie Interstellar, and in the movie it's the question of who are they? Are they us? Because you really have this whole grandfather paradox thing going on, because if it's us from the future, just by their being observed by us, are we not altering the future? I mean, how does that work? So it's fun, a thought, but what I don't like about the idea of time travel is, if that's true, then in the future, anyone can come and spy on you or I at any particular moment in our life, and maybe not at our best, and observe us. And I, as much as I want to go back in time and see the dinosaurs and see how history took place, I think unless we are so enlightened by that point, I think human beings would misuse that technology. Imagine we get there. Let's say we can travel back in time 200 years from now. How evolved are we actually in 200 years or 300 years? And, what if it's some descendant of yours is curious about Ryan Sprague? Oh, he's that ufologist who got things started in our family, and now it's a tradition of ufology, right? And they want to go back and spy on you. And it's like, if you can time travel, I feel like we're losing a certain amount of our privacy and anonymity. Time also gives us anonymity.
That is a really good point, man. Not only that, but it also is that big thing of destiny or fate. If we can constantly go back and correct things, as Quantum Leap would teach us, you are a child of the 90s. Oh God, man, don't get me started. MacGyver, Quantum Leap, Highlander. I could go down the list if you want me to. But no, you make a really good point. If we have that power, if we can harness time and space in that way, that it will be used for nefarious reasons or or many other reasons, and we don't know the effects it'll have on anything moving forward. It could just implode the entire existence if you really think about it. So no, that's a fascinating way to look at it, and thank God, that we can have these theories and that philosophy is not dead.
Indeed, yeah. And in fact, I would say philosophy is thriving with the unfortunate rare exception of, and on this show, I am open and I tolerate and accept and listen to, entertain a multitude of different wild theories. But one I'm really upset about is the flat earth theory. And the fact that this has sort of taken hold in the culture to some degree. And it's so easily disproven. And yet you have people working really hard to convince not only themselves, but a lot of other people worldwide that there's this conspiracy to hide the fact that the earth is in fact flat. And it's for lack of a better word, it's taking a dump on science and our understanding of the nature of the universe. And that I find very scary, and that's only possible because you have a proliferation of ideas, which is wonderful, but there is that side effect.
I am so happy you brought that up, Alan. I mean, so a lot of the listeners of my podcast who contact me, almost weekly or daily, they constantly try to convince me to cover the flat earth theory. And look, I'm open-minded, just like you, very open-minded. But there comes a point where the information I choose to cover or you choose to cover, once you disseminate that out to the public, people do listen. They do. And I'm not saying like I'm right or always eloquent, but there are such things like the flat earth or anti-vaccine or QAnon, let's say. They're dangerous. They're dangerous. And I do apologize if I'm offending anyone in your audience, but these are anti-science. They go against everything that we've worked so hard to achieve and to progress as humans, both scientifically or religiously, metaphorically, politically, everything. And that's not what we need. We need to theorize in a healthy way and represent ufology or the paranormal in a good light.
In a responsible way. Right.
In a responsible way. So when you have detractors bringing up things like these, anti-vaccine or, flat earth theory, it goes against so much that we strive to make legitimate. So it's hard, man. It's frustrating. All politics aside, there are conspiracy theories out there that can have extremely real world consequences and not for the better. So I caution people to be careful at what they hear, how they sort of take that and what they do with it.
So you don't believe the earth is flat?
Oh man, where do I start? Did you see the documentary?
Right. No, I don't know. I've seen so many videos on YouTube. It's all mixed up in my head. I may have seen it. I'm not sure. Was it released on Netflix not too long ago?
It was on Netflix, and the funny thing is, at the end of the documentary, they spent the entire documentary trying to prove it flat, and in the remaining moments of the conclusion, as it were, they proved themselves wrong. So I don't know what to make of it, man. I honestly don't.
It's odd. I think your general point is well taken, that the very devices that they're using, smartphones, computers, to spread this information online are based on laws of physics. And so for someone to argue against the laws of physics, which rule the devices you are using as a platform, by arguing the laws of physics, you're sort of undermining existence as it is and as you're using it. It's very contradictory. So And yes, I agree with you. There are many things that are dangerous. Conspiracy theories should be presented responsibly. Yeah. I think one of the smartest people at doing that was Jim Marrs. He came up with a lot of ideas and a lot of conspiracy theories. But I think there was a certain amount of, but I don't really know. Almost his equivalent of like Stanton Friedman's A Gray Basket, if you will. It wasn't always in absolutes, and there are certain hosts, oh gosh, what's his name? I forget. Alex Jones. Right.
Yep. I knew you were going.
Yeah. Like everyone gets worked up about. Okay. A secret pedophilia ring behind a pizza shop related to the Clintons. And so what happens is somebody gets shot at.
My teeth I know. Right now, man. I'm sorry.
No, and somebody got shot at. Someone walked into this poor person's pizza place and a gun went off because they were convinced by listening to this show, that show, Alex Jones' show, that there was a secret pedophilia ring taking place in their basement. That's dangerous. That's no joke. If you have a theory on a conspiracy, you have to be very careful how you talk about it, how you disseminate it, and just also don't make stuff up either.
Yeah.
Like it's really simple.
And you got to be willing to pay the price. I mean, you look at someone get shot during Pizzagate, and what does Alex Jones do? He says, "Oh, I'm just an actor. I'm just an entertainer." And, so that he's not responsible for what these people are doing.
But
then he goes right back to preaching something else.
Yeah, you have to be really, really careful. All right, so we're kind of getting off topic. We'll get back onto the UFO thing. So now everybody knows how we feel about that.
Welcome to Flat Earth Fashion.
So I do want to know, what for you was the most fascinating personal story that you heard when you were researching your book?
Wow, it's hard to choose. Again, it's that cliche. It's like trying to choose your favorite kid or whatever. There's one that really stuck out to me that I cover in a lot of my lectures, and it's because first of all, it's multi-witness, and you like hope and pray for those things in our field. That it's not just one person, one person's testimony. And this was a very dramatic story from a woman named Patty out of Michigan. She had a triangular UFO sighting in 2006, I believe it was, in which her and one of her daughters, they witnessed a massive craft hovering just above their home, a few miles away from Lake Michigan. And Patty was heading out to walk her dogs, and right away she kind of felt something was off. Like the dogs, they would not leave her front porch. And she kind of made way down the front lawn and tried to get them to come with her. And she notices that they won't move. They're like terrified of something. So she starts looking out, seeing, is someone approaching? Is there maybe some sort of animal out there? And that's when she looks up in the sky and she notices this triangular craft floating right above the tree line, and stops her dead in her tracks. And she starts yelling for her younger daughter, Jennifer, to come outside. Jennifer, come out. She's inside watching TV or whatever. She finally hears. She comes out. And Patty just wanted to make sure she wasn't seeing things. Someone else to say, I'm not making this up. I'm not hallucinating. So Jennifer comes out and she confirms to her mother that she sees this thing in the sky. And they are both just staring up at it. And it's kind of creeping closer until it's literally above them, like directly above them. And what's most interesting about the event, and this is kind of why I keep looking at this case, is Patty, she reported that she heard a low humming sound, or kind of like a whooshing sound coming from this craft. And she asks her daughter, Jennifer, if she can hear it. And when she looks over at Jennifer, she's covering her ears and telling Patty how unbearably loud the craft is. So they're having completely different experiences in terms of hearing this craft. and all while this is happening, Patty is feeling calm and sort of collected, very euphoric almost, is how she described it to me. And when I spoke to Jennifer, she told me during all this she felt absolutely terrified, like this thing was there and it was not good. So you have a mother and daughter perceiving the same thing, they're looking up at the same thing and having completely different experiences. And that really fascinated me, perception, when it comes to these things. Right. The triangle darts off at breakneck speeds. It disappears out of sight. Some time passes, and the younger daughter in the family, Jessica, she's getting ready for bed one night, and she's walking down the hallway of the house, and she sees this figure coming out of her sister's bedroom, and she assumed it was her sister heading to bed. And when whatever it was came into clear sight, it clearly was not her sister. She described the being to me, and it was about 3 feet tall. It had a large head, and there were distinct facial features. I apologize. There were no distinct facial features except for large black eyes and a small slit for a mouth. So we're kind of looking at what I would consider a prototypical gray alien in her house, walking out of the bedroom, and starts to slowly move towards her parents' room, and she freaks out, right? She goes back into her room and she hides under the covers, and she's scared. She's scared to death. And then she hears her mother's voice in her bedroom, and her mom's coming in to say goodnight. And she's really too scared to say anything. And when she takes the covers down, she sees her mom there, and she's just leaving the room after saying goodnight, and she can see the being behind her mother just surveying the room, kind of checking things out. And she is petrified at this point, frozen. And her mom disappears, and the being just kind of leaves the room with the mother, and that's it. So it gets stranger and stranger from there, man. They start having weird poltergeist-like activity throughout the home. Their electricity goes out at one point, and the Con Ed guy or whoever comes out to fix it, and he has a UFO sighting of his own right over the house as well. So he just bolts it and doesn't fix the electricity. Eventually Patty contacts the electrical company. She's like, what the heck? The guy just disappeared. He didn't fix anything. And when she finally got a hold of him, he said, I'm not coming back. I will send someone else back out there, but there's not a chance in hell I'm coming back out there. Yeah. So I don't know what to say at this point, man. As Patty is like telling me all these continuous things that are going on, paranormal, ufological, possibly supernatural, it really started to eat away at their family. And I remember the daughters telling me at one point they just stopped talking to their mom because she just made things worse. She became paranoid, and she was religious, and she saw all of this as evil, demonic. And while the kids are like, no, I saw an alien. I saw a freaking alien in our house. Like, this was not a demon. So they all could not decide what to do or where to go or where to turn. And it kind of tore their family apart. And finally, many years later, they started to reconnect and go through all these experiences together, find common ground, and now they all get along. But these experiences tore them apart as a family. And for Patty, it's still going on. She still lives there, and she's still having experiences. So while the daughters have sort of moved on with their lives and kind of turned away from it, which you can't blame them for, the mother continues to experience it and acknowledge it. And it's heartbreaking. I don't know what to really say or do, and that's not really my place either. She reported this to me. I told the story. I continue to talk to her about it and listen, but it's hard. It's hard, man. You want to help every person who comes to you and has these experiences, but at the end of the day, it's how they deal with it and what they decide to do with it. I'm in no place to tell them what they experienced, but if I can be an avenue to just have a listening ear, that's it for me. And Patty is the definition of someone who has been so affected by this that I'm left speechless and stunned at the amount of stuff that's happened to her and how it's affected her life for good and maybe a lot of bad too.
Earlier, you had mentioned alcoholism. Was that more than one person who experienced addiction, possibly related to their encounter?
Yes, absolutely. More than I would like to admit, actually. And that's tough, you know, and that's what people turn to. And I just, it's hard because again, you can't tell someone what to do. These are adults dealing with very traumatic events in their lives. And if that's the way they're going to deal with it, that's the way they're going to deal with it.
But how do they describe that to you? I mean, how do they say, this is why I do this to deal with that? Is like, what's the tendril that connects, like is there something psychologically happening there that they can express to you?
A lot of them told me it was to just get through the night or to, I mean, I've been there. There's times where I just want to forget everything and I will drink a couple whiskeys and black out and wake up the next day at 2 PM. You know, we've all had those nights, but for these people, it's a constant thing. And it's a fear. It's a fear that if they stay awake or if they acknowledge these things happening, it's going to happen again. And that's tough. So for the people I talked to, it was more a coping mechanism than anything. It's like, let me just black out so I don't have to experience this again. And that's heartbreaking.
Well, I have to tell you, what's kind of stunning about that is that you wouldn't relate someone dealing with alcoholism and recovery with this sort of event. Typically, people in the AA rooms aren't saying, hey, I had this paranormal experience. And those are rooms that are considered safe places. So what is going on that they can't even share it in places like that? Is that just purely a stigma issue?
I think so. I mean, yeah, there's a stigma that comes with addiction, but at the same time, there's a stigma that comes with experiencers as well. And, you know, they do find each other and they do have support groups. And that's good. It's good if they can share their own stories, their own trials and tribulations with one another and how they deal with it. But also it's tough too, you know, when you hear about AA meetings where people will find each other and then become sponsors, but then that's tough too, because you have two people who, and I'm in no place to, you know, judge or say this is what always happens. I'm not a recovering alcoholic. I'm not a part of that world, but sometimes it can go bad and they can ruin each other's chances of staying sober.
But you sound like you're speaking with some experience there, though. Did you know someone who had that experience?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've had friends and family members who have gone through the program, the 12 steps and everything. And sometimes it's, you know, it's rocky. They have good days, weeks, years, and then something happens. But for me, it comes down to these people having these experiences. Where do they turn? Even if they turn to each other, are they enabling one another as well?
I see,
you know,
I see. Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard, man. And I can't pretend that alcoholism is in any way even close or comparable to people having alien abduction experiences. But everyone's just looking for support.
Yes, exactly. I mean, that was the most revolutionary thing about AA, was that it started with just a couple of people in a room talking about their problems.
Yep.
And they realized, wait a minute, we stayed sober for a long enough time. Let's try this out. And now group therapy has probably saved countless lives. over these many decades, no matter what the experience.
Absolutely.
And humans who have had positive, sure, but especially negative experiences, have been victims of abuse, trauma. If they can talk to somebody else who hears them and can relate to them, that's like one of the most profound steps towards recovery. And you're right. I guess and I hadn't thought about that before, I guess if you put experiencers in a support group together, the first effect is a positive one because they don't feel alone anymore. But you're right. I guess there could be complications. There could be a fantasy fulfillment building upon each other's fantasies, which is the same thing that could happen with addiction groups. And that's why sponsors are sponsors and not called counselors or, that sort of thing, because they both have their imperfections. They both have their experiences that can affect their personal behaviors, and they're there to support each other, but they're not perfect. And one negative thing could feed into another. It's really interesting. I haven't thought about that in terms of experience or recovery. Yeah.
It's a weird comparison, but at the same time, like, it kind of makes sense, When these people come together in terms of experience or support groups, it's not like the person in charge isn't an experiencer themselves, quite oftentimes they are. So it is just a constant cycle of feeding one another's stories, or some of them might be fantasy. But at the same time, like, what do you do, man, when no one else is willing to hear you out? You find each other, you find understanding of one another, and sometimes that's all these people need. So when people say, oh, I don't think it's good that alien abductees are meeting one another and like enabling one another's stories, I'm like, no, who else is going to listen to them? They go to a psychologist and they're going to tell them, you're unstable, or this is clearly something we have to look deeper at in terms of traumatic abuse as a child, or this or that. When in reality, some of them might have had a legitimate experience. So it's so hard, and I feel so much for these people who go to these support groups because they're just looking for someone that can maybe give them answers, but more importantly, to just listen and to just tell them, you're not crazy. This happened to me too.
Right. What about you? Was there any long-term effects that happened to you because of your setting? Besides your interest in the topic?
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely the big one for me. I mean, it did send me on a path I never saw myself going down, to be completely honest. But I would say the biggest impact my UFO event had on me was opening me up. I was closed off for so long after it that paradigm shift, or that moment when I acknowledged it and embraced it and actually became almost like proud of it, like a badge of honor, that completely changed my whole self. Not just the UFO side of me, but like my self-esteem, my confidence, my willingness to talk about these things in a serious manner with individuals all over the world. I remember when I was single and going on dates, I would bring it up. It'd be the first thing I'd bring up, and I would never get a second date with people. So it's also a good filtering mechanism.
Good, yeah.
If people can't accept that part of my life, that's not a kind of person I want. And if they can't support me, if they can't even, I'm not telling them they have to believe what I do or the people I interview, but if they can be open-minded enough to support the pursuits or endeavors I have, like my current partner does, then that's all I can really ask for. So for me, it came down to that moment when I was willing to say, not only do I research and look into the skies for UFOs, I have had that experience myself. So yeah, it's exciting, man. It's like a whole new. I'm born again as a UFO person.
Right. Yeah. Just don't start a cult.
I promise.
Okay.
I promise that will not happen.
So yeah, when people talk to you, do they feel better to get that story out there? Not just share it with people in their life, but to know that their story is out there in the world. Is that therapeutic in any way?
Big time. I can't tell you how many people in the book came up to me after they read how I relayed their story, or how people came to them after and said, "Whoa, like I believe you," or this or that, or reached out to one another even. I can't tell you how many emails or phone calls I got of them thanking me for that. And that's not what I was looking for, but that's like one of the most rewarding things for me after the book came out is they got closure of some sort. They might not have found answers to what that happened to them, but now they can talk to one another and share more experiences or details with one another.
Sure.
And for some people, it was just to get it off their damn chest for so long. So many of the people in the book, it was their first time coming forward. So that's a big stepping stone for them. So it was really cool. I would say all but one person in the book had a positive experience after and came to me and said, "Oh, I wish I didn't do this." So those statistics, or that ratio, is pretty good in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I'd say so. What is your next book? Because you have all of these stories, right? That's a sort of backlog of stories you didn't include in this book. Is your next one going to be a continuum, or, as you had mentioned earlier, are you going to go more the way of a hybrid cryptozoology ufology?
Yes, I've been really wrestling with that for a while now, ever since the first book came out, which was strictly UFOs. I really started to open up, and I have a lot of people to thank for that, but mostly a woman by the name of Shannon LeGros, who I actually co-hosted a podcast with for a while, Into the Fray Radio, which I believe is also on KGRA. And she is the one who sort of took me under her wing and showed me those different worlds of cryptozoology, supernatural, paranormal. And I had so many questions, and I had no idea where to turn to. I was so lost. And she kind of really held my hand with that and became my Obi-Wan Kenobi, as it were, in those realms. And so I find myself now, after writing a UFO book, being like, what else is out there? And like we mentioned earlier, I do think there are connections to be made. So that's where I'm going, man. I want to go full in, head on, and look at these things. I want to go to a haunted house. I want to go to, whatever, the SETI Ranch, and experience whatever's going on there.
We were there and had a strange experience, so be prepared.
There you go, man. See, that's what I want to do. I want to do more boots on the ground stuff where I can really put myself in the shoes of these people and come out, hopefully, with some answers, but probably just more questions, to be completely honest.
Well, do you think there's something spiritual for you in the study of, exploration of, and curiosity of all of these paranormal things?
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up a Roman Catholic. I practiced Catholicism for most of my life. I would say I haven't veered away from that. My faith or my spiritualism is still there, but I think it's very malleable. It changes constantly. Every time I hear a new story, I'm just like, okay, could this connect to my own personal beliefs? Possibly. Maybe I could take something from it. So yeah, I think there is a deep spiritual connection with all of this as well, but I would never tell people what to believe or to make that connection. It's how you take it. It's the lens you look at these things through. And
well, do you think
if I can, yeah.
Well, do you think that through the exploration and learning, do you feel like you grow as a person?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I remember when I asked a priest once at my church, what's the church think of aliens? Or like, is this okay? Am I okay? Am I going to go to hell if I believe in this stuff?
Right.
And he just kind of laughed and told me, no. He said, look, the church has no official stance on any of this. He said, if you want my personal opinion, I do think there's aliens out there. I do think there's things we possibly don't know, but that only strengthens the power of your faith. And if there is a God out there that you believe in, it only strengthens his or her power of creativity, and creation.
Yeah.
So I do think this journey I'm taking, whether it's with UFOs or the paranormal, it does strengthen my faith, my beliefs, and my journey. I'm just like everyone else. I want answers to life. And that means so much more than finding the answers to UFOs. I want to know why we're here. And if these weird paranormal topics have even a small, if they fit into that journey at all, awesome. But that question we all want to know is, why are we here? What are we doing here? And for me, man, I honestly think my purpose in this world is to look at these topics and to open the minds of people as I have myself, and to just talk about it.
All right. Well, perfect. We'll leave it there. We are at the end of Ryan. And do you have any upcoming events before we go that you'd like to share with everybody?
Oh, sure. In September, I'm going to be speaking at the UFO Contact, the Michigan UFO Contact event. You can Google that to find out more. And then I'm going to be doing Alien Con in Dallas, Texas in October.
That's
I don't have
exciting.
the dates in front of me, but Alien Con's a lot of fun for any of your listeners out there. I highly suggest checking it out. It's like Comic-Con mixed with a UFO conference. So
Right.
I have all that information you can find on my website at somewhereintheskies.com.
All right, Ryan, thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it. I'm glad we finally got to do this.
Me too, man. It was my pleasure, my honor, and I'm a huge fan, so thank you.
And I yours. Thank you. All right. So that's it. If you want to find out more about Ryan Sprague, author of Somewhere in the Skies, just go to somewhereintheskies.com to keep up with all his current events and upcoming shows. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now. You've been listening to your official contact for the best in alternative talk radio. I almost forgot the tagline there at the end of the show. To find out more, you can go to kgrradio.com/paranormalnow or at paranormalnow.net. And on social media, of course, we are on Twitter at paranormal_now and IG at paranormalnow. Join us next Tuesday for more strange topics. And a special thanks to KGRA producer and time-space maverick Race Hobbs. Until next time, live in the mystery.